Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to case number 9468, the application of Baltimore Gas and Electric Company for approval of a new gas system strategic infrastructure development and enhancement plan and accompanying cost recovery mechanism, or STRIDE 2. Let's begin by taking appearances. We'll start with our commission staff, counsel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Annette Garofalo and Michael Dean on behalf of the Commission staff.
Mr. Cleaver.
Good morning, Your Honors. Joseph Cleaver on behalf of the Maryland Office of People's Counsel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Maggie Witherup on behalf of the Maryland Energy Group, and with me is Ms. Chastity Threadcraft, also on behalf of the Maryland Energy Group.
Good morning, Chairman,
Good morning.
Commissioners. Kim Curry, representing Baltimore Gas and Electric Company.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Daniel Herson, also representing Baltimore Gas and Electric Company.
All right, very good. We have our list of witnesses for today, so we'll begin with Mr. Burton. Before we do that, though, any housekeeping we need to take care of?
I only had one item, Your Honor. We filed the notice of evening public hearing, the affidavits for those. They should be in the docket. I just wanted to enter those, have those marked as BG. I think it's BG is the nomenclature we're using.
Yep.
Exhibit 2, and have that moved into the record if I could.
Okay, without objection, BGE 2 is marked and admitted.
That's all I had for preliminary matters.
Very good. Let's call up our first witness.
Okay. The company calls Mr. Burton to the stand.
That the testimony you're about to give in the matter of impending is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do. Good morning, sir. Can you please state your name for the record?
Adam Christopher Burton.
Mr. Burton, what is your current position at Baltimore Gas and Electric Company?
I'm currently Vice President of Gas Distribution at BG.
Mr. Burton, do you have before you a document entitled Prepared Direct Testimony of A. Christopher Burton, dated December 1st, 2017, consisting of 23 pages and 3 exhibits?
I do.
And do you also have before you a document entitled Prepared Rebuttal Testimony of A. Christopher Burton, dated March 7th, 2018, consisting of 41 pages and 11 exhibits?
I do.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have the Prepared Direct Testimony of A. Christopher Burton marked for identification as BG Exhibit 3, and the Prepared Rebuttal Testimony of A. Christopher Burton marked for identification as BG Exhibit 4.
Okay, BG 3 and 4 are marked.
Mr. Burton, were these documents prepared by you or under your direct supervision?
Yes, they were.
Do you have any corrections you would like to make to these documents at this time?
Yes, minor correction on the direct testimony, the initial one. I guess first, on page 1, it states that I'm the incoming Vice President of Gas Distribution, which was accurate in December, but I am currently the Vice President, so striking incoming, and later on line 7 will oversee, because I do currently oversee the gas distribution activities.
Are there any other corrections?
Yes, in the rebuttal testimony on the exhibit, there was an error in the date, and in the reference, it was actually should be dated March 7th, 2018.
Which exhibit are you referring to, sir?
I guess it's the attachment at the end of the rebuttal testimony. It actually should be referenced as Company Exhibit ACB 12. It was MDC incorrectly, MDC 12. And it should be dated March 7th, 2018. Sure. Thanks.
Is that the extent of your correction, sir?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Burton, with these noted corrections, if I were to ask you the same questions today under oath as you were asked in your direct and rebuttal testimonies, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Did you answer the questions in your direct and rebuttal testimonies to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move BG Exhibits 3 and 4 into the evidentiary record.
Without objection, BG 3 and 4 are admitted.
Mr. Chairman, at this point, we'd like to conduct some live rejoinder of Mr. Burton. I believe the commission authorized that in the procedural order
Okay.
in this case. Mr. Burton, let's start with the surrebuttal testimony of Office of People's Counsel witness, Mr. Larkin Connolly. Can you please turn to pages 4 and 5 of Mr. Larkin Connolly's testimony?
Okay.
Most of it actually appears on, the question is asked on the bottom of page 4. The answer is provided on the top of page 5. This is where Mr. Larkin Connolly is discussing his leak rate trend analysis and states that in his view the increases in leak rates over the 2013 to 2016 time period, quote, do not indicate that materials have degraded over the course of stride to warrant BG's greatly accelerated program. Did you read that portion of his surrebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have a response to that point Mr. Larkin Connolly is making?
Yes, and as part of the preparation for this, we did update Figure 7 in our testimony with respect to the leak rates of cast iron. Now that 2017 is completed, we've actually updated, so we do have the 2017 leak and leak rate data to add to that. I think Council actually has a copy of that updated Figure 7 with the additional data point for 2017 included.
Mr. Chairman, can I pass out a copy of that?
You may.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have this document marked as BG Exhibit 5, I believe we're up to.
BG 5 is marked.
Sorry, Mr. Burton, continue.
Yeah, so as I said, this is an updated version of Figure 7 from Exhibit ACB1 from my direct testimony, and now just includes an additional data point for the 2017 cast iron leak rate, and clearly shows that there is still an increasing leak rate associated with cast iron mains. In fact, 2017 is 15% greater than the year prior to stride with respect to leaks, and 25% more than when the leak rate that was occurring prior to stride being implemented in 2012. This is an increasing leak rate that has continued to show a trend, is again part of our reason for looking for acceleration of our cast iron leak rate replacement program. In fact, when you look at since stride, we've actually experienced the 3 largest number of leaks and the 3 highest leak rates of all time for cast iron have occurred since stride began, which is indicative of the assets that continuing to degrade in performance and incorporating a increased safety risk. The other information I have is from the initial stride filing, which really shows the leak rate that was occurring in the cast iron plant prior to stride 1. It was part of our direct testimony associated with the initial stride back in 2013. I think Council has a copy of that as well.
Oh, okay, sure. Thank you.
We can share.
This is figure 9 from the initial company exhibit associated with the initial STRIDE plan, and represents the data with respect to cast iron leak rates that was known at the time of the initial STRIDE plan. And really shows that for 2009 to 2011, the leak rate for cast iron was relatively flat and really only started to increase starting in 2012. And we've seen the leak rate continue to increase, now to a point in 2017 of 2.38 leaks per mile of cast iron main. We summarize these points in one of the data request responses from staff. I believe it's staff 17-2, where we actually sort of accumulated all this information. And just a couple of the points I'd like to make with respect to the characterization here in terms of the leak rates of cast iron mains. I don't see as a modest 10% increase in cast iron mains. A 10% increase being modest. First, when you look at what the leak rate was back in 2012 and 2013 and where it is today, it's closer to a 25% increase. And when you extrapolate that over 1,200 miles of cast iron, that really represents well over 100 leaks per year. And that compounds because every year you don't replace that, the assets are on the system. So you're continuing to set the stage for increased leaks. So I don't believe it's 10% is a modest increase with respect to the leaks. The other thing to me that is really relevant in terms of our plan is we're replacing cast iron, which is leaking at a rate of 2.38, with modern plastic, which is leaking at a rate of 0.05. So when you look at that difference, a dramatic difference, almost anywhere from a 50 to 70 times factor of better safety performance with respect to modern equipment. And to me, that really drives the public safety benefit of the program.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have the second document that was passed out marked as BG Exhibit 6.
Okay.
And Mr. Burton referenced a data response that the company provided to a question posed by staff. I'd like to pass that out now, if I could. Chairman, I'd like to have this marked as BG Exhibit 7, if I could.
BG 7 is marked.
Mr. Burton, did you complete your response to that question?
Yes.
Okay. Can I next address your attention to page 6, lines 4 through 10 of Mr. Larkin Connolly's sir rebuttal testimony, where he states that he is dubious of the premise that a 10% change in leak rates could be driving the need to accelerate cast iron main replacements. And then he states that for STRIDE planning, the difference in leak rates of 2.25 and 2.07 leaks per mile should be immaterial. And finally, he says that the company should have come to the conclusion in 2013 that the cast iron leak rate was grounds for replacing cast iron main at a pace that will remove it from the system in 20 years. Did you read that?
Yes, I have it here.
You have a response to that, Mr. Burton?
Yes, as is displayed in Figure 9 from the initial STRIDE filing, the leak rate was much less with respect to the cast iron system when we initially proposed the initial STRIDE plan. And in fact, the initial STRIDE plan did accelerate the replacement of the cast iron system from what was previously a 70-year replacement plan, reducing it over in half to a 30-year plan. But as we've seen with the most recent data, including 2017, both the leak rate and the number of leaks with respect to cast iron, even with the replacement that's occurred in the first 4 years of the program, has continued to increase, which really, to me, is reasons for actually continuing to accelerate the replacement of the cast iron system. I don't think the 10% is what we ought to be focusing on with respect to the increase in leaks. I think the better thing to focus on is the dramatic reduction from 2.38 leaks per mile to new modern equipment, which is on the order of 0.05 per mile. And it's not only the reduction of leaks, it's the risk that those leaks can have from a public safety perspective.
Mr. Burton, can you please turn to page 11, Mr. Larkin Connolly's Sir rebuttal?
Okay.
Specifically lines 1 through 3, where he states that your assertion that a cost-benefit analysis is not required in this case fails to acknowledge that the company is requesting a further acceleration of leak-prone replacements,
Yes.
which is different from approval to establish initial stride plan. Did you read that?
Yes.
You have a response to that statement?
Yeah, as far as my reading of the statute, the stride does not the plan does not require a cost-benefit analysis. It does require benefits, and I think we've clearly seen benefits with respect to the environmental and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. We've seen benefits with respect to job creation and economic development associated with these. In addition, it's very hard to quantify from a cost-benefit perspective the public safety benefits. But I think it's very apparent that if you are reducing leaks on the order of hundreds a year, there are significant public safety benefits that may not be able to be quantified in a cost-benefit analysis, but are certainly benefits.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. I'd like to switch to the Sir rebuttal testimony of staff witness Alvarado. And specifically page 6,
Okay.
where Mr. Alvarado states generally that you missed the point of his testimony and that he believes BGE should present methods of analysis to calculate the risk-reducing effect of Stride 2 excuse me, relative to the money being spent so that the Commission can decide whether Stride costs are reasonable and prudent. Did you read that, Mr. Burton?
Yes.
Do you have a response to Mr. Alvarado's comment that you missed the point of his testimony?
Yeah, I don't believe I missed the point. I think, I guess, and part of what I'd like to, I pointed out is that we manage our system risk associated with our gas distribution system as part of our distribution integrity management program, which is part of a PHMSA regulatory requirement. I believe I stated in my direct testimony, as part of my exhibit ACB1 here, if I can just reference it accurately here. Yeah, and it starts on page, that's actually repeated my rebuttal, I apologize. Yeah, it's on my exhibit ACB1 of my direct testimony attachment. But the PHMSA requirement, which is really part of PHMSA rule in 2009 and a subsequent distribution integrity management plan, 49 CFR Part 192, Subpart P. And this is a regulatory requirement for all distribution, gas distribution companies. It's a very structured integrity management plan looking at system risk holistically. And it looks at the knowledge of the system, identification of threats, evaluating and ranking risk, identifying the measures to address those risks, and monitoring and reporting mechanisms. And we follow that, and that program is filed. That distribution integrity management plan identifies asset performance and worst performing actors like the services and mains that we're looking to accelerate the replacement of, but also looks at risk from other assets, regulators and valves and meters and service regulators associated with metering assemblies. It looks at our programs such as your damage prevention program to protect the assets from excavation damage. It looks at our gas odor response programs. It looks at our public awareness programs. It looks at all multitudes of risk. And all of these risks can't be come to a single system risk identification or factor associated with a business case. But we do look at those and we look within the relative categories, ranking the risk, and then taking the corrective actions and mitigating the risk within those categories. And that's exactly what we're doing here with respect to mains and services. These are the worst performing, thus the highest risk assets in that category, as coming from our distribution and integrity management plan. In terms of the prudency and reasonableness, as part of the STRIDE plan, there is an audit process, and that audit process is filed each year after every plan year, which does ensure that the program was done and leaks were reduced as part of the program, and that is a mechanism that it gets filed with the commission for the commission to review the reasonableness of the program. In terms of an overall system risk factor or business case factor, I'm not aware of one in the industry, but we'd certainly be willing to sit down with staff and other stakeholders, maybe as part of a working group, to try to craft one or to understand within the industry if one does exist. But to my knowledge, there is not one that exists that way.
Mr. Bergen, can you please turn to page 7,
Yes.
lines 7 through 10 of Mr. Alvarado's testimony,
Yes.
where he states that you failed to mention that STRIDE is not an asset replacement plan, but rather a cost recovery mechanism, and that BGE does not need STRIDE to replace any assets it deems necessary for safety because absent STRIDE, BGE can recover costs through rates. Did you read that section?
Yes.
Do you have a response?
Yeah, I think it's that STRIDE obviously is an asset replacement plan. And without that, we would not have been able to replace the amount of assets that we have in the past 4, now going on 5 years. We wouldn't have been able to reduce the replacement of these assets from a 70-year plan to one that is now 30. So I disagree with that point.
Mr. Burden, can you turn to page 8, lines 3 through 6, where
Yes.
Mr. Alvarado says, I believe Mr. Burton's value of life argument is simply an attempt to distract the Commission from the fact that the STRIDE statute requires that BG be allowed to recover STRIDE costs only if they are prudent and reasonable. Did you read that section?
Yes.
Do you have a response to that statement?
Yeah, it's certainly not my intention to distract the Commission or sensationalize the point with respect to the value of life. And I know you really can't put a value on that from a cost-benefit perspective. But clearly in the call to action from PHMSA, the public safety aspect of this replacement program was front and center. We discussed that as part of our initial STRIDE filings, and we've continued to emphasize the public safety aspects of that. And I believe in my rebuttal testimony, I did file a quote from Mr. Clemenson of staff, which spoke to the public safety is really the pipeline safety benefits are really what we're talking about with respect to the STRIDE plan, and that was part of the initial STRIDE hearings.
Mr. Burton, can you flip over to page 9,
Yes.
lines 5 through 7? Mr. Alvarado states, if STRIDE reduces risk a lot, then the Commission might find that spending more money on STRIDE is prudent and reasonable. Did you read that?
Yes.
Do you have a response to that statement?
Well, I think that when we look at the dramatic improvement in terms of the performance of the system, replacing assets that have a leak rate in the terms of cast iron in the order of 2.3, with respect to the 3/4 inch high pressure steel services, a leak rate of over 6, we're talking about a dramatic improvement in terms of risk, and thus, that is an important consideration.
Please flip to page 10, lines 7 through 9,
Yes.
where Mr. Alvarado makes the statement, BG does not have a good track record forecasting STRIDE costs, since it clearly underestimated the cost of STRIDE 1 during case number 9331. Did you read that statement?
Yes.
Do you have a response to that statement, sir?
Yeah, I think, and as we've stated many times, when you compare it to the initial estimates done in 2013 with respect to the STRIDE cost estimates, certainly the performance of the company has improved each plan year. And when I look at the most recent plan years for Stride. In 2016, the company was able to complete its Stride plan with a variance of 1%, which really speaks to the improvement with respect to estimating and execution of the Stride plan, applying lessons learned in the first 2 years of Stride to year 3. In year 4 of Stride, just completed in 2017, and last week we filed the true-up mechanism associated with that Stride plan per the requirement. We were able to complete our 2017 Stride plan at 2.5% below budget. So that's the budget that was put forward with respect to a plan in the fall of 2016, executed in a plan year of 2017, really demonstrates that we've improved both the estimating and the execution of the plans. And I really think we ought to be measured with respect to our Stride 2 estimates on the most recent 2 years and not go back to the original estimates done in 2013.
Mr. Burton, can I ask you to pull your mic a little closer to you?
Sorry about that.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, I have a copy of the relevant pages from that variance filing I'd like to pass out.
Okay.
I'd like to have this marked as BG Exhibit 8.
Okay.
Mr. Burton, had you completed your response to my prior question?
Yes.
Finally, Mr. Burton, can you turn to the rebuttal testimony of Staff Witness Acosta? And I'd like to direct your attention to page 9, lines 15 through 22. Are you there?
Yes.
Where Mr. Acosta states that BG does not provide the following information, and he lists a number of items. Did you read those items?
Yes.
Do you have a response to that claim?
Yes. As part of our project list that's filed in the end of the fall of the year prior to execution, we do include in the write-up many of these items. For example, the geographic boundaries, the streets and the blocks of the geographic area of a specific project are identified, and the amount of main and service that's expected to be retired are included in that. However, with respect to some of these items that are listed, they're not always known until you actually get closer to the execution phase. In the fall of the year, we haven't yet done RFPs for all of the projects. We haven't awarded all the contracts to our supply partners. And in fact, when you get into permitting requirements and working with local jurisdictions, the installation method may change. And other requirements may change as you get into the job when you get to obstructions and things of that nature. So while some of these elements are already included with respect to the project list and the filings, other ones really are not known until you are really ready for execution or much closer to the execution of the project during the year.
Finally, sir, can you turn to page 11?
Yes.
Lines 1 through 3, where Mr. Acosta stating that by classifying leaks as grade 3, that BG is lowering its standards and contradicting stated environmental and safety goals. Did you read that statement?
Yes.
Do you have a response to that statement?
Yes, I disagree that we're really lowering standards by using a grade 3 leak standard. A grade 3 leak standard is part of the GPTC guideline associated with grading of leaks, which is an industry accepted and approved standard and is used by other gas utilities in Maryland. In fact, the grade 3 leaks, as we categorize them, really allow us to prioritize our work and do grade 2 and grade 1. Focus our resources first on grade 1 and grade 2 leaks, which have more emissions and more safety risk. And we don't ignore grade 3 leaks. We do continue to monitor them. If they do get worse, we would prioritize them and put them back into the schedule. And in fact, since January of 2017, we've actually experienced just over 200 grade 3 leaks, but we've already repaired 76% of those. So it's demonstrating that we are not ignoring them, we are actually doing them. The grade 3 leak categorization does allow us not only to prioritize, but to do them opportunistically. So to the extent that we're already doing a main replacement program or doing an operation pipeline job in an area that's going to cover that, that allows us to do that as part of that project, which has benefits because it reduces cost to customers. Or bundling work in an area. If we have an existing leak in an area, we could bundle that grade 3 leak as part of that job, saving a truck roll to an area, reducing that expense. So it's actually has benefits that accrue to customers. And as I said, we do monitor these. We go back and resurvey them. So I disagree that it's actually lowering the standard with respect to safety.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move BG Exhibits 5, 6, 7, and 8 into the record.
Any objection?
Your Honor, no objection to 6 through 8. With respect to Exhibit 5, I do note here that there's a sentence under the table which states that this data for the leak rate for cast iron main for 2017 was not previously available. This is on what's been marked as BG Exhibit 5. But I would object on the basis that a foundation hasn't been laid to support the admission of this exhibit, which updates data in the case as we're sitting here on the first day of hearings without any further foundation that explains when this data first became available.
Mr. Herson.
Well, Your Honor, I mean, this is a data point that we think is germane to the case and the testimony at issue in this case. And if it was available before, we would have provided it, but this was literally only available in recent time. So we provided it here. These are not opinion statements underneath, they're just factual statements. And Mr. Burton can address, if there are questions about it, why we think it's important to include for the record.
Mr. Hurst, you said it wasn't available until recent times. What exactly do you mean by that? Or Mr. Burton?
Yeah, as part of the annual DOT reporting process, we actually go through an audit of our records from the prior year, and we file a DOT report, which includes a bunch of other information, the amount of our assets by rate class and things of that nature. That was just recently submitted to the DOT, I believe, last week. So we've been working on doing that auditing process as part of that.
Okay. Objection is noted, Mr. Cleaver. I'm going to allow this in to complete the record.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, let's go to, so BGE 5 through 8 are admitted. Let's go to questions from Meg. Ms. Wither.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Burton.
Morning.
Would you agree that BGE has an obligation to maintain the integrity and safety of its infrastructure?
Yes.
And that obligation is there regardless of whether there is a stride surcharge?
I think I'd have to say yes. The stride surcharge is part of the existing stride plan, which was submitted 5 years ago.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you. Next, Mr. Cleaver.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Burton. My name is Joe Cleaver. I'm from the Office of People's Counsel. Nice to see you.
Good morning.
I'd like to ask you a couple questions about these exhibits that your counsel just handed you. Can start with what's been marked as BG Exhibit 5. which includes the updated 2017 data point that we were just talking about. If you look at the second bullet point,
One second. I did not mark them with the numbers, so
I apologize.
if you don't
This-
mind, is that?
Oh yeah, sure. This one says Figure 7, historical cast iron main leak rate, and it has a line showing
Yes.
leak rates for 2010 through 2017. Do you see that?
Yes.
Under the table, there are 3 bullet points, and the second one says that the cast iron main leak rate continues to demonstrate an increasing trend. Do you see that?
Yes.
But the increasing trend has only been demonstrated consistently for 2 years. Isn't that right?
Well, the graph represents 7 years. So,
Right.
I mean,
But is it-
if you were to do a compound annual growth rate, the actual increase is from 2010 or 2011, or, the compound annual growth rate, except for one data point, 2014, would certainly show an increasing trend.
Did you mean 2015?
No, the largest number here is 2014.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you said that except for 2014, it shows a trend.
Now, I guess when I look at a graph like this, it shows an overall increasing trend with respect to leak rates. And you will see some ups and downs. Certainly, since 2015, the leak rate has increased. But if you look at over the past 7 years, the compound annual growth rate does increase over time.
I understand. But if you were sitting on the stand in March of 2016, and 2015 was your most recent data point, you wouldn't be able to say that the leak rate continues to demonstrate an increasing trend. Would you agree with that?
Well, again, it's according to how far you go back. And again, when I look at a 7-year graph, I would look at it being an increasing trend over the last 7 years.
And you would make that statement even if the most recent data point had been about 25% less than the previous year?
When you say 25%, I guess I'm confused by that.
I'm comparing 2014 to 2015. Do you see that? Isn't 1.98 about, doesn't that represent about a 25% decrease?
Yeah, from 2.48. Yeah, mathematically it would, yes.
Thank you. You're aware that BGE filed an application to amend its initial stride plan in 2016, correct?
Yes.
With that amendment application, BGE sought to add to its initial stride plan an asset class that was pre-1970 3/4-inch high-pressure steel services. Are you
Yes.
aware of that? And the stated basis for adding that asset class to the stride plan was that that particular asset class had recently exhibited increasing and high leak rates, correct?
Correct.
Correct. But when BGE filed its amendment to its initial stride application, it was aware of this 2014 data point shown here on this figure of 2.48, correct? If that was filed in 2016?
I don't know the dates when that was actually filed. So I know the first year of the 3/4-inch program was planned year 2016. I don't know when that was filed.
All right, would you accept subject to check that it was filed in 2016?
Yes, I mean, if that was the case, then yes.
So at that time, the company would have been aware of this data point for cast iron main leak rate of 2014 of 2.48, correct?
Yes.
And there was nothing in the amendment application that cited that data point and sought to modify or revise the replacement rate for cast iron main as set forth in the initial stride plan, correct?
Right, not to my knowledge.
Right. Your counsel directed you to page 6 of OPC witness Larkin Connolly's rebuttal testimony a minute ago, and specifically he directed you to lines 7 to 10 of page 6. Let me know when you have a chance to get there.
I'm there.
And specifically Mr. Larkin Connolly's statement that if BGE views the current cast iron leaks per mile as grounds for replacing cast iron mains at a pace that will remove all assets from the system in 20 years, then it is reasonable to assume that the company should have come to this same conclusion in 2013 when it was developing the original STRIDE plan. And in response to your counsel directing your attention to that statement, you said that the proper comparison is to compare the current leak rate that this asset class is exhibiting to what the leak rate would be for plastic. Do you recall saying that?
I recall saying that. I think I did that in response to a 10% modest change in terms of the leak rate. And I think the proper focus should not be a 10% change in the leak rate, but instead the 50 to 70 time improved factor of the leak of the new plastic that's replacing the cast iron.
And you said, I believe you said that leak rate was 0.05 for plastic?
I believe the leak rate for plastic mains was 0.05 in 2016. I don't have the 2017 number in my, off the top of my head, but it's, in that range, I think.
So thank you for that. And in light of that, going back to what was marked as BG Exhibit 5, which contains this table, says Figure 7, historical cast iron main leak rate. If that's the proper focus, to use your word, when the leak rate for this asset class was 1.88 in 2012, when the company filed its first STRIDE plan, versus the most recent leak rate of 2.38 for 2017, as this exhibit shows, does comparing 1.88 to 0.05 really result in a material change to the appropriate replacement rate as compared to comparing 2.38 to 0.05?
Well, I think replacing a 1.88 factor with a 0.05 would certainly be a material change, yes.
That would be a material change, but is there a material change between the difference from going from 1.88 to 0.05 versus going from 2.38 to 0.05?
I guess what I would say is that since 2012, the leak rate has continued to increase. And since that time, we've had, based on this chart, the four largest, actually, all 5 years since 2012 have seen increased number of leaks and an increased leak rate beyond what it was in 2012. And to me, it's an increased number of leaks even with less assets. So it's not like you're reducing assets and you're reducing the number of leaks. You're reducing assets, increasing the number of leaks and the leak rate, which really means that you haven't stemmed the tide with respect to the public safety risk. More leaks means more risk.
Were you with, I don't recall looking at your testimony, were you with the company back in 2013 when the initial STRIDE plan was filed?
Yes, I've been with the company since the mid-1980s, over 30 years of service.
Thank you. Did you personally have an expectation of what the leak rate would do in years going forward at the time that the initial STRIDE plan was filed with respect to this asset class?
Yeah, I don't know that I was familiar with all of the details of that STRIDE plan as filed. I did serve in a role of Vice President in Gas and Electric Operations and Planning in the early 2000s prior to STRIDE being submitted and approved. And we certainly were looking at asset replacement programs that would replace assets and reduce the leak rate.
Thank you. If I could direct you to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony at page 40.
Okay.
If you could take a look there at line 13. Let me know when you've had a chance to look at that. Just 13 down to 17.
Okay.
So your testimony here is that if the commission limits BGE's STRIDE 2 plan to the current pace, you say BGE will reluctantly accept this decision but feels compelled to work additional asset replacement projects outside of STRIDE to put BGE on pace to meet BGE's proposed STRIDE 2 plan timeline, and will seek to recover non-STRIDE project costs through future base rate cases. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
So is it fair to say that it's the company's understanding that even if the commission orders that that STRIDE 2 be kept at current replacement rates, that the company is nonetheless permitted to make accelerated replacements outside of the STRIDE program beyond what the commission authorizes?
Yeah, I guess the way I characterize this is that, we believe very strongly that in our STRIDE 2 plan, and that the accelerated replacement is necessary for the two specific assets that we've marked for accelerated replacement, the cast iron mains and the 3/4 inch high pressure steel services. So we believe that they're the worst performing mains and services assets. So when you look at our integrity management plan, they're the highest risk, and we believe they're outmoded assets and we need to get them off of the system. We've always done replacement work outside of STRIDE. So there's really no change from that perspective. We do main replacement programs. We do other service renewals, whether they be reactive or proactive, outside as part of our normal course of business. So we believe we would continue to move to reduce the risk of the system by replacing the most vulnerable assets.
Under this hypothetical scenario that you describe here, where the commission approves your plan but revises your proposed timeline so that they're more in line with the current plan, how would the accelerated replacement work performed outside of STRIDE compare to the average level of accelerated replacement work occurring outside of STRIDE over the past 4 years?
Yeah, I don't know that I've done the math or the comparison with respect to that.
If the commission, in this case, with the replacement pace as the primary issue before it, determines that an appropriate replacement pace would, say, be 48 miles per year, as Mr. Larkin Connolly suggests, wouldn't that be an indication of what the Commission viewed as a prudent level of investment for that asset class?
Yeah, can you state that again?
Sure. If the Commission were to agree with the testimony of OPC and staff witnesses and approve your plan but revise the timelines to be more in line with the first STRIDE plan, wouldn't that be an indication that the authorized replacement pace is what the Commission views as prudent with respect to that specific asset class?
Yeah, I don't know that I can put my head and mind in terms of what the Commission would mean by that. I'd have to, really more fully understand that.
Again, sticking with this hypothetical here in your testimony where the Commission approves the plan but at a pace that's more similar to the current plan, with respect to the accelerated replacement projects completed outside of STRIDE, how would the company demonstrate that those particular projects performed outside of STRIDE were necessary in the given year in which they were performed, as opposed to including them in a subsequent year and including them in STRIDE?
Yeah, I guess I'm struggling with the hypothetical. I guess the only thing I can say is, when we're looking at those two asset classes, a simple example is the 3/4-inch high-pressure steel services. The leak rate of those says that about 1 in 15 is going to leak every year. I think that fully demonstrates the need to replace those as quickly as possible. The cast iron is showing an increasing leak rate and increasing number of leaks. So I think we've demonstrated that, the performance of those assets, and particularly when it comes to cast iron, that was fully recognized in PHMSA's call to action in the industry, and the industry as a whole is looking to accelerate the replacement of those assets across the entire country.
Thanks. Your Honor, may I approach with an exhibit?
May.
No, it never works the way you want.
Just one.
Your Honor, I've just handed the witness one of the company's responses to a staff data request, specifically question 17-1. I would ask that be marked as OPC Exhibit 1.
OPC 1 is marked.
Mr. Burton, before you have a question, staff data request 17-1, that asks about your rebuttal testimony, specifically the provision we've been talking about. And the question asks what the company's criteria will be for selecting STRIDE versus non-STRIDE projects in STRIDE 2. And if you look, you cite your testimony in the answer, and then second to last sentence, you state that the selection criteria of the operation pipeline work done outside of STRIDE would not be any different than selection criteria for projects worked within STRIDE. Do you see that?
Yes.
So if that's the case, if the selection criteria is the same, and again, if this hypothetical that you describe in your testimony, where the commission approves the plan but limits it to the current pace, if that comes to fruition, how would the company make the decision as to what goes into STRIDE and what is performed outside of STRIDE?
Yeah, I don't know that I've fully thought through all of the logistics of that. Again, as part of our STRIDE program, we've looked to create, area-wide regional projects to replace the assets and then replace all the outmoded assets in a given area, both the mains and the services. And the order of them is not necessarily one factor. You can't do all one in one geographic area. At times you have to work with local jurisdictions and permitting agencies to do them in different orders. So I think the selection criteria would really, it would be varied by that. So I don't know that I've figured out, if given this hypothetical, how you would choose one versus the other. I think the response I made with respect to 3/4 inch high pressure steel services isn't really addressed in this answer, but certainly is one that identifying where those are and replacing them would be a different task.
Thank you. You're aware that with respect to STRIDE 1, this commission has permitted the company some flexibility and discretion in terms of substituting projects and as to the balance or mix of projects that are presented to the commission with the yearly project list in any given year. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Again, on this point, if the company, if this hypothetical turns out to be true, and if the company performs some work outside of STRIDE in order to meet the replacement paces that it has set forth in its application here, would it still be necessary for the company to maintain flexibility with respect to the STRIDE program and project substitutions and so on?
My initial thought is yes. There are times when we submit a project in a list in the fall of the year, and as we move into starting the construction phase, local jurisdiction may ask us to change the timeline of that. There may be a streetscape project that's coming that they want certain things done quicker, or based on community outreach, they may want things done in a different order or change the timelines. So I would think that there's always the possibility with these long extended programs of the need for flexibility with respect to that.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to ask you one quick question about your direct testimony. If you could turn to page 7.
Okay.
Here, towards the bottom of the page, line 18. I just want to confirm this. You say, similar to our currently approved STRIDE plan, BGE proposes to include in its STRIDE 2 plan any asset, regardless of material type, that requires replacement for system safety or reliability purposes as it is encountered in the efforts to replace the 5 targeted assets. I know there was a lot of discussion at the hearing in the first STRIDE plan about the fact that in carrying out the Operation Pipeline program, the company may encounter, for instance, plastic associated with some more at-risk assets that are specifically part of the STRIDE plan. And then in that instance, the company explained why that may be necessary. Is this statement that you make here that the removal of any asset regardless of material type, is that specific to that Operation Pipeline scenario where the company may encounter some asset of a type of material that's not part of the STRIDE plan, or are there other scenarios beyond Operation Pipeline where that may occur?
Well, operational pipeline, I think, is where it occurs primarily, because those are, an area-wide project where you're bringing the entire gas distribution system in a several block area, typically 1 to 3 miles, up to current standards, and getting rid of not only the old outmoded assets, but also upgrading anything. And if you have cast iron across several blocks, but you took, and previously due to a dig-in or a break, had to replace a couple sections of cast iron with plastic or with coated steel, it wouldn't make sense to try to join those. It makes sense during this project to replace all of the assets at one time and bring it all up to current standards. So I think Operation Pipeline is the principal project where that occurs. Now, when I think about high-pressure steel service renewals, the 3/4-inch high-pressure steel services, they're not part of Operation Pipeline. But, as part of a service renewal, we may have to upgrade a meter, we may have to upgrade a regulator or something like that. And if we find that, we're going to bring it up to current standards.
So if hypothetically, if in connection with a replacement of a pre-1970 3/4-inch high-pressure steel service, the company encounters an attached meter that's not up to current standards, the company would replace the meter and attempt to recover those costs through the STRIDE surcharge. Is that is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know that I had. I guess hypothetically, I think if we find an asset like that, we're going to replace it because, when you're there and inspecting it, you need to bring it up to current standards. So, I don't know all the details, the fine details of the accounting, but I think that would, be part of that. I don't expect that to occur, frequently, but I do think that, that's a possibility.
And thank you for the answer, but just to clarify, and it's your view that would be STRIDE eligible in that scenario?
Yeah, yes.
Thanks. Refer you to table 4 in the stride plan that's attached to your initial testimony, that's on page, and this is attachment ACB to your direct testimony. This is the actual plan, and that's table 4 on page 15.
Yes.
The leak, this sets forth the bare steel main leaks. Do you see that? At
Yes.
the top. Actually, I just noticed. Is this a typo here? It says cast iron main in the box. I just noticed that. Just to be clear.
Yes, I believe that's a typo. I think that should say bare steel main.
Thank you. This the bare steel main leak that was the most current when the company filed its initial stride plan would have been the 2012 number of 2.06. Is that right?
Yes.
And since 2012, there's been a overall decline down. Now we're at about 1.41 in 2016. You see that?
Yes.
And let me ask you, I know the company just updated the cast iron main leak. Do you know off the top of your head what this bare steel main leak is for 2017, now that data is newly available?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't think it's drastically different than what it was in 2016.
Okay. But if you could turn the page to table 5, excuse me, I guess it's actually turning 3 pages to page 18, table 5. This is the bare steel services leak rates set forth at the bottom row of this table. And when the company filed its initial plan in 2012, in 2013, the most up-to-date data was the 2012 number of 1.07.
Correct.
And there's been a overall decline down through 2016 of 0.8 to 0.89. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then just turning 2 more pages to page 20 on table 6. Same data for copper services, and the 2012 number, which was the most up-to-date number the company would have had when it filed its initial plan, was 0.89. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that's generally declined to 0.69 in 2016. Do you see that?
Yes.
Based on the company's view that some of its asset classes and the leak rates justify an acceleration, has the company, taking that view, ever considered extending the replacement period for some of these other asset classes where the leak rates have declined in order to mitigate the rate effect of the proposed increase to the stride activity with respect to the asset classes such as cast iron main and the pre-1970 steel services?
I guess let me explain it this way in a couple things. I think your reference to table 4 on number 15 or page 15, it does show that since 2012 we've reduced the bare steel main asset by over 50%, and that really represents early projects with respect to the stride plan, which really targeted the worst performing bare steel assets. The failure mode of bare steel is different than it is for cast iron. Bare steel is subject to corrosion, and once the pipe wall corrodes to a certain point, you really can't do leaks. You can't really repair it. The only mode really is to replace it. And you typically, even when you expose it and you find corrosion in one area, you're likely having corrosion along that entire length of pipe. Cast iron, the failure mode typically is more mechanical at the joints or cracks in the cast iron. So, while you could repair it, it's not a thickness issue. So it's a different failure mode between those two assets. In terms of extending this, I do think that when you look at the nature of the remaining bare steel on the system, and again, it's only 22 miles, and I think it's even less than that when you do end of 2017 because we did replace some last year. Naturally, it's going to extend the time, and thus we're not asking to accelerate it because the performance is stabilized. We're not seeing a continuing decline in the remaining assets, and the lengths of the individual sections are going to be smaller. They could have been bare steel that was between some cast iron systems or smaller segments of bare steel as opposed to large areas of bare steel that's remaining. With respect to the bare steel services and the copper services, we're not looking to accelerate or replace those as part of a service replacement program. Instead, you're naturally going to see them replaced as the cast iron and bare steel systems are replaced because that's what they're connected to. So when you go into an area and you replace 2 miles of cast iron, typically copper services are connected to a cast iron main. So we're going to upgrade that at that time. So it's really less about accelerating, I don't think it would be necessarily possible to push out the replacements of those assets unless you change the construct and put in a plastic main and not upgrade the service at that time, which we don't think is the right thing to do.
Your comments that you made in the early part of your answer regarding the differences between the failure mechanism of bare steel and cast iron and how the interplay between that distinction and the leak rate. The company was aware of all of those properties and those failure mechanisms specific to those asset classes when it filed its initial plan in 2013, correct?
Yes.
Thanks. Turn you back to your rebuttal testimony for a moment. And just here on page 7, at line 16, you talk about the fact that when you're comparing the costs of a capital program and talking about it in terms of the impact on customers, that what ultimately is the revenue requirement that's derived from the capital expenditures will be less in terms of a dollar figure than the actual capital spend. Is that fair to say?
I think that's what it says.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand the context here.
Let me know when you...
Okay.
And just to be clear, that that point that you make is applicable to any aspect of utility rate making, correct?
Well, certainly if we're installing assets that have a long life, the rate impact of that is spread over the life of those assets. So yes.
Thank you. Your Honor, I believe I'm near the end of my examination, but I would ask for a brief moment of indulgence.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Burton, thank you. I don't have any further questions. Your Honor, I would ask that OPC Exhibit 1 be moved into evidence.
All right, any objections? OPC 1 is admitted. Now's a good stopping point, so we'll take about a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 11:37, and we'll hear from Ms. Garofalo. Okay, welcome back. I'm on to case number 9468. Welcome back, Mr. Burton. Ms. Garofalo, your witness.
Good morning, Mr. Burton. I'm Annette Garofalo. I represent the commission staff.
Morning.
You're responsible for administering Stride 2. You will be when it begins, correct?
Yes.
And that means that you're currently responsible for administering the Stride plan?
The plan year 2018 for Stride, correct.
Okay. And are you familiar with the history of that plan?
Yes.
And you sponsored in this case 2 Stride plans, one with your direct testimony and one with your rebuttal testimony.
Yes.
Can you tell us the difference between the plans?
Yeah, I think when we looked at the direct testimony includes a Stride plan, which really looks to accelerate the replacement of the 2 worst performing assets on our system, a cast iron main, which as we've seen has an increasing leak rate, and the 3/4 inch high pressure steel services. And then, the corresponding services associated as you replace those areas. So when we put forward the revised plan, based on the response, it really looks to still perform that, but as part of Stride, really reduce the amount of cast iron replacement. It would not accelerate it beyond the current levels, and would keep the 3/4 inch high pressure steel at the current levels.
So there actually was no change in the ratio of how the assets were treated. Merely the time frame was slowed. Is that a fair statement?
I don't know that I understand the question fully.
Okay, well, let me try to reword it. So you proposed in your initial Stride plan to get rid of a certain number of assets by a certain year, and the year I believe was 2023, and then with the second one you're going to let's see, that may be the reverse.
Yeah, I believe the initial plan,
28.
we wanted to replace things, accelerate from replacing all of the cast iron by 2043
Right.
to replace it by 2037, which is a 6-year
Okay.
advancement.
So when you did the revised plan, did you adjust the 2 types of assets for which you had done the acceleration, the bare steel and
So
bare
I
steel
think
and,
I think what was revised is what was included in Stride for the next 5 years.
Okay, so let me ask the question this way. Will your 2 most risky assets be accelerated in any way under the new plan, the plan that's attached to your rebuttal testimony?
Yeah, I guess as part of Stride, no. I think we would still look to, particularly, and if assets fail, we're going to have to replace them. So there will be some replacement of assets outside of Stride because of leaks or failures or things of that nature.
So you currently, when you file your Stride results for the year, and you include some non-Stride work, and in answer to Mr. Cleaver, I think you talked about Stride work, and in your testimony you also talk about non-Stride work that will be included even under the accelerated, your initial testimony.
Yes.
And so has there been any change in how that would be treated? what you would consider to be non-stride work that you would do?
Are you referring to non-stride work or non-outmoded assets? Just making sure I understand your question.
So, well, let's start with what you do now. So when you come in at the end of the year, you tell us about the stride project list, where your progress is on that. And usually there's a little box that has dollars and cents, but maybe not a whole lot of detail for what has been repaired during the year that was not included in stride.
So projects, I'll say assets that were replaced outside of stride.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
Yes.
And so let's start with just your direct testimony. You said you would include that in stride this year. And I guess I was trying to figure out exactly what that meant, because it was always not clear whether these were stride eligible or not. So are you meaning that you'll include some additional stride eligible work in your stride plan, but not collect the surcharge?
No, again, I don't recall exactly what I said. I think in terms of work being stride eligible, I was referring to in the course of replacing a project and replacing assets, you may, as part of a 3-mile cast iron main replacement project, come across some plastic main or some coated steel main that would be replaced as part of that project to bring that up to the full, up to current design criteria. So those are included in stride. I wasn't talking about non-stride projects being included in stride, but instead assets that were encountered as part of a project.
And that is still your position on rebuttal?
Yes.
Did you prepare a list of stride projects as part of this case?
We prepared an initial set of proposed projects. Again, this is in continuing with our current stride plan and looking at the existing program similar to what we've done in the past. And I think that was attached in my direct testimony. There's a preliminary list of projects here.
And I don't believe you attached a revised list with your rebuttal testimony. Is that correct?
So I do have one here.
Oh, you do? Okay.
So I believe the answer is yes.
All right. So looking at that list, can you tell me how you revised that initial list?
Yeah, I don't know that I can go into specific details, and what I would say is this is a preliminary list based on, the current methodology that we go through, understanding all of the factors that bundles projects. I would say these are projects that are in the pipeline, and some of them are at different stages of design or initiation or others. But again, this is just a preliminary list. If approved, I'm sure we would be under a similar process of finalizing the final list and submitting it to the commission as part of the normal process going forward.
Did the number of cast iron mains that will be addressed in year one of the stride tube change?
Yeah, I believe this was under the, again, the revised plan would put forward something closer to the current rate. I believe when I look at this, it says 46.4 miles.
Okay. Do you know how many miles was covered either last year or the year before and under the stride plan?
Subject to check, somewhere 46 to 48 miles is where we've been in plan years, 2016 and 2017.
And in the Stride 2 that you proposed, how many miles of main would you be aiming to replace?
Yeah, our plan to accelerate was moving that up to 55 miles in my initial direct testimony.
And has BGE ever replaced that number of miles in a year?
No, we're still under, accelerating, but we're confident in the ability to do that given what we've been able to accomplish in over the past 2 plan years and what we expect to be able to do in 2018.
Okay. So, I'm interested in how BGE looks at risk, and I guess we could start with your project list. So you're looking at risk in the same way you did for the Stride 1 under your revised project list.
Yeah, I would say risk is one factor that goes into the project list. So, and I don't see that we're looking at it any differently. But risk is not the only factor that goes into a project list.
So what are the criteria for selecting projects to be included in Stride?
Yeah, I think I included that in some of my testimony. If I can find that.
So let me say, I think I'm asking you this question because I wasn't sure of the exact criteria, and I was particularly after your rejoinder, I'm still less clear
Is that with respect to risk or?
with respect to risk.
Well, I guess let me answer that a little differently. With respect to the risk, we look at system-wide risk as part of our distribution integrity management plan. That's what I referenced, which is a structured, comprehensive approach to all of the risk associated with the gas distribution system. And that's both asset risk, operational risk, threats associated with damage prevention, excavations and things of that nature. So all of those things are part of that. Those factors do track the leak history by asset, and that's what's really brought forward these asset classes and the outmoded assets as having the highest risk. Thus, that's what goes into creating a project that can replace those outmoded assets because those assets have the highest risk. In terms of scoping out a specific project, we look in a regional area to put a project that can be done in a neighborhood, upgrading a system to bring it to current design criteria. And that does allow us to do the work one time as opposed to going back multiple times in a community. We work with the community, and we sometimes do have to change the scheduling of it based on, or the order of it. You'll see in our project list sometimes, Woodlawn Phase 1, Woodlawn Phase 2, Woodlawn Phase 3. So we've taken an area, we've broken it up into segments, and then we've, attacked it in terms of discrete projects in a specific order to replace. So I wouldn't say that, the risk is a factor in identifying the assets that need to be replaced. But I don't know that we have a criteria that then says to do that project because there's many other factors that go into that.
So when you are looking at a list of projects, you don't rank order them by risk?
No.
And is that why when you had to, or when you did revise your plan, you didn't up the number of cast iron mains, for example, that would be replaced?
I'm sorry, but the revised plan, I believe the cast iron went down.
Right. So you didn't change, you left the ratio the same, but you didn't actually, so you, rather than putting more really risky mains in there, you didn't do that. You just extended that over a short, or over a different period of time.
Well, I guess in terms of a ratio, the current plan, I believe, only calls for, about 2 miles of bare steel main per year. So I don't know that anything would really change that ratio much. And some of that bare steel is being replaced as part of the projects. We could have a neighborhood that includes both cast iron and bare steel. So when you're doing that neighborhood, you happen to be replacing some of each.
Give me a second here. Can you tell me how STRIDE projects that are in the current STRIDE program, but either have not been completed or were not intended to be completed, will be handled under the, under STRIDE 2, or at the end of STRIDE 1? What will happen to those projects?
Yeah, I guess I don't know that I fully understand the surcharge rate making portion of that. I think that's probably better handled from a one of the other witnesses, possibly Mr. Case or Mr. Frayne. In terms of continuation, we have had projects continue from one year to the other. And I would expect, just from a continuity perspective, we'd like to continue to work projects to complete an area and bring an area up to current design standards.
Right, so last year you had at least two projects that were going to go over into this year as planned.
Correct.
And so I guess I'm just trying to figure out, are they on that project list that you have, for example?
Well, I have the project list. I don't know off
You don't-
the top of my head whether any of these, again, this is a preliminary list.
Right.
I would think that, if approved, we would file a list of projects that would be part of, the next plan year associated with that.
I guess this is actually a pretty simple question. I'm just trying to figure out if it would be your plan to keep I don't care about the surcharge right now.
Yeah, from an execution perspective, I think we would like to continue to finish and replacing the assets and bringing an area up to, the current design standard.
Under the current STRIDE, or would you just move it into whatever is approved as a result of this case?
Yeah, I think that part of the question is probably better answered by one of the other witnesses.
Okay. this may not be a question for you, but I just want to take this opportunity to ask you. Before you were in your current position, there was a meeting of the STRIDE working group, and there was a decision to give a report on O&M expenses, and how STRIDE had affected those at the end of the current STRIDE. Are there any plans for that?
Guess I'm not fully aware of that, but I'm sure if the working group has to look at that, I'm sure we will be working on that.
I think that wasn't in your testimony, but I didn't want to miss this opportunity.
Okay.
Your Honor, I don't have any more questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Garofalo. Mr. Herson, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, just a second, please. Mr. Burton, Ms. Garofalo, in her cross-examination of you, she was using the words revised plan, I believe. Just for clarity, what is your understanding of the revised plan?
Well, I think, as I said, we still we're committed to doing the plan we are, but the revised plan for STRIDE would only incorporate I think the 1 year is 47 miles of cast iron.
So when you're saying revised plan, you're referring to the plan that was attached to your rebuttal testimony?
Yes, the rebuttal testimony, which is now dated March 7th.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Ms. Garofalo also asked you a question about the factors that the company considers in selecting projects. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And I don't recall your exact answer, but I think you may have hesitated. I'd like to direct your attention to the direct testimony and exhibits of Mr. Acosta, Staff Witness Acosta. And specifically the exhibits attached to Mr. Acosta's testimony.
Is this in the testimony or in the
It's in the exhibits.
exhibits
This is
as part of
direct-
the data request?
Exhibits to his direct testimony. And these don't have page numbers on them, but I'm referring to a data response the company provided to staff DR3-4.
Okay, let me find that. Yes.
Do you recall sponsoring this response to the staff data request?
Yes, that's what I was looking for. I thought it was in my direct testimony.
Does this reflect your recollection of how the company selects projects?
Yes.
Now going to what some areas that Mr. Cleaver asked you. He referred you to page 40, lines 13 through 17 of your direct testimony. Tell me when you get there, sir.
This is direct, not the rebuttal?
I'm sorry, rebuttal.
Okay.
My fault.
Okay.
And specifically the passage on lines 13 through 17,
Yes.
which concludes that we'll seek to recover non-stride project costs through future base rate cases.
Yes.
And I recall Mr. Cleaver asked you some questions about how the commission might review non-stride projects for reasonableness and prudency. Do you recall that line of questions?
Yes.
What opportunity would this commission have to review non-stride projects, if any, for reasonableness and prudency?
I believe that's part of every rate case.
And so, as part of the rate case process, they'd be able to analyze non-stride projects that were put before them for potential cost recovery?
Yes.
What, if any, opportunity does the commission have between rate cases to review BGE selected non-stride projects?
Yeah, I guess we file each year what our current assets are as part of our DOT report, so we are keeping track of the assets that have been replaced, and we would respond to any data requests associated with that.
Do you have an understanding of any non-stride project list that may be submitted to the commission?
No, not at this time.
Mr. Cleaver asked you about tables 4, 5, and 6 in the plan that was attached. For this one, it can be the plan attached to your direct testimony.
Okay.
And I may have missed this if you stated it before. My apologies. What is the company's position regarding acceleration in the proposed Stride 2 plan with respect to bare steel main?
Well, we're not focused on accelerating bare steel main. The focus of the Stride 2 plan is acceleration of the two worst performing assets, our cast iron main and the high pressure steel services, the 3/4 inch high pressure steel services.
And then on table 5, which is about bare steel service leaks excluding the pre-1970 3/4 inch asset, same question. What is the company's position regarding acceleration?
They're not the target of the accelerated plan.
On table 6, it talks about copper services. Now, those are being accelerated, correct, Mr. Burton?
Yeah, they're being accelerated only by the nature of the projects to replace the bare steel main. Copper services are predominantly attached to cast iron. So when you replace the cast iron, you're going to be upgrading the copper at that time.
I think Mr. Cleaver asked you a question about gas meters and whether those would be included in Stride. You recall
Yep,
those
yes.
questions? As Vice President of Gas Distribution, does your department make decisions about which assets are included in rates?
And not independently. We actually work with finance and accounting and the other areas for that.
So would Mr. Frayne perhaps be a better witness to answer questions about specific assets and whether they're included in Stride?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Herson. We'll go to questions from the bench next, and I will begin. So, Mr. Burton, thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony. I had a couple questions. The first is in terms of the cast iron main and Stride 2, as proposed, would accelerate the replacement of that. Are there certain geographic areas where that where cast iron main is still in the ground, where the replacement is going to take place, or is it spread out all over the service territory?
I would say, because of the age, it's all of it is over 50 years. It's predominantly in and around Baltimore City.
Okay. And I guess that would follow then the copper services, which would be replaced alongside the same
Yes.
same area. Okay, thank you. In terms of the Stride 2 proposal in your direct, I'm trying to get a sense for the impact on ratepayers, and we'll have a discussion with Mr. Frame, I guess, as well. But can you tell me how many gas customers BG&E has now?
I think we're approaching around 700,000 gas customers. I think it's 680,000 or so is the total customer count.
Yeah, okay. And the total estimate of $963 million over the lifetime of the assets, that would be recovered from these gas customers, correct?
That's my understanding.
Which would be residential and commercial. do you know, has BG&E done a calculation, at least on the residential side, as approximately what that would come to for a residential gas customer over the life of the assets?
Yeah, I've not done that. I think it's better to ask Mr. Frayne that question.
Okay, thanks. I will do that. I wanted to ask you, going to it's page 40 of your rebuttal. That's the statement about if the commission were to adopt the Stride 2 alternative, that the BG&E would reluctantly accept that and would continue, though, to accelerate its pipeline replacement beyond the Stride 1 schedule and seek recovery through rate cases. So I want to get a sense for why you're telling us that. Is that to put us on notice? Are you looking for tacit approval from us to do that? What is the point of that?
No, I don't think we're looking for approval. I think it's really a strong indication that we believe these assets, the failure rate is unacceptable. We need to replace them. We need to improve the public safety performance of those assets. So as part of that, and it's going to be part of our distribution integrity management plan, then we see that the need to continue to replace these assets.
Okay. In terms of OPC and staff's recommendations that the commission approved the existing acceleration schedule that was laid out in Stride 1, and you provided testimony on that and gave us the alternative schedule. My sense from their recommendations is there is a concern about accelerating too quickly and the ratepayer impact of that, because certainly, as we discussed, ratepayers will have to pay for all of these costs. So in your view, is that something the commission needs to try to strike a balance in terms of the pace of acceleration with the ability of ratepayers to afford these additional costs?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly cost is always a consideration, and we always need to strike that balance. But from a engineering perspective and from a risk perspective, it is a public safety risk if we continue to have these assets and we don't put forward a program to replace them. And we've done that initially as part of Stride 1, and we're continuing to do that as part of this proposal.
And in terms of the replacement of both bare steel and cast iron, am I correct that the direction you're getting from PHMSA is that all of that needs to come out, needs to be replaced, within a certain schedule, I suppose? Then in terms of PHMSA, there's no long-term kind of acceptable practice where that would remain useful as part of a system?
My understanding is PHMSA's call to action really looked at those being outmoded assets and called for replacement of those assets. I don't believe they put a specific date on that, and I think different jurisdictions have looked at that differently, but where we are right now is we're looking at continuing to accelerate the replacement of those.
All right, thank you. Appreciate you answering my questions. Commissioner Richard.
Yeah, good afternoon. I guess just a couple of questions. First, the Maryland Environment, and Energy Group, to their question about that the company already accepts that the integrity and I think the safety of the system is already a responsibility, regardless of whether we have a Stride program. And I presume that means also that. And then normal rate making would then accommodate making sure that you have the correct maintenance and the correct replacement, that type of thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe it's a responsibility.
Okay, and so should we expect that somewhere around 2040, assuming you're a little sooner or a little later, you do. I guess dig out of this hole that I guess of having to make the replacements necessary. Does that mean at that point we would no longer need a Stride type program, a special outside of rate making program to again accomplish that?
I don't know that I've put myself forward that many years to figure that out. I think when I look at our current asset base, around 1,200 miles of cast iron, our normal replacement rate was around 70 years. Stride has allowed us to reduce that by more than half, so get it to 30 years, which I think is much better. So, not sure that I have thought through with respect to the other mechanisms.
Well, going back to your first answer, that normal rates should include maintenance and replacement. Is that correct? I guess I want to find out, are we digging ourselves out of this hole? And this isn't just a BGE problem. I mean, obviously, this was something the federal government through PHMSA has identified that around the nation we need to take care of. But are we, including in rates now, are we maintaining our system to the necessary extent that we will not need a stride-type program in the future? Or are we letting ourselves get further behind?
Yeah, I would say with respect to cast iron, we weren't. I think, stride allows us to catch up so that we can, put a program together to replace those assets. I think I think maybe Mr. Case could speak more about what's in current rates as opposed to, other programs there.
Okay, yeah, I'll ask that question. I'll also just ask staff as well. I'm just interested to know that. And also, I want to just talk a little bit about some of the staff recommendations. Overall, I was a little surprised that I guess maybe your reaction in testimony to reject many of their recommendations, especially since staff is agreeing that we need to continue the stride program at least at the current pace. But they did note that in their assessment, the company had not performed, I guess the number was about 80% of what was projected at the beginning of the stride program, and that they did go over budget. So that led staff in their testimony to say that, I just summarize a whole bunch of their testimony, but that they would like to have more meaningful and detailed information. But that was something that you seem to just reject. Can you... Overall, why is that? It seemed like overall staff was supportive of this stride program. I don't think that I rejected it. I do think we already provide a lot of meaningful information with respect to reporting. Some of the questions we're asked, we're tracking data in ways that we don't track it. So, in terms of tracking, costs for bare steel replacement versus cast iron replacement. We do not track our cost that way because it's really the cost of what's going in, not that what's being replaced. That is the driver of those costs. We do track the actuals on the back end of the project, and we provide very, very detailed information associated with that as part of our annual reports and our true-up mechanisms. But not all of that information is available when you're putting forward the initial projects in the fall of the year, because we haven't done detailed designs with all of those projects. We haven't done walk downs of all those projects to understand all of the specifics associated with the projects, and we don't necessarily know some of the impacts of permitting processes, restoration processes with respect to paving requirements in local jurisdictions. And some of that changes when you actually get into the nature of the project. Okay. Well, do you feel like you have more information now? This, again, is a concern of staff. And since in this type of a program, when we approve the plan, we're kind of effectively saying we, approve recovery. I mean, it kind of goes, in a sense, hand in hand with this type of a program. So I think staff does have a good point in wanting to get the necessary information. And, it seems in your testimony you kind of dismiss it on page 12 in your rebuttal that, well, they never raised it before. And then you go back and you cite that, well, in the plan we only have to have an estimation, as if somehow that, do you consider the estimation an important part of how the commission evaluates the plan, how the staff evaluate the plan? So would you agree that that estimation is important?
Certainly the estimates are important, and I think for the past 2 plan years, our estimates have been very accurate with respect to the projects that we put forward. I think comparing it to the initial estimate that was done in 2013, prior to the initial stride, and the overall plan, was a little unfair. That estimate did not include factors like inflation. It was stated, but it wasn't included in there. And there were learnings in the first few years of the STRIDE program and changes to permitting and paving requirements in jurisdictions. And in particular, I think as part of my response, the fully incorporating the cost estimates or the actual cost of dense urban construction into those estimates. And I think our performance over the past 2 years has demonstrated that we've been able to do that.
Okay. Well, do you see an opportunity, again, to work with staff, and maybe it's a recommendation, and I'll ask the same question of staff, of how we could perhaps incorporate that recommendation of making sure that they have what they consider meaningful and detailed information. Because I would also note in the same citation for the estimation, 4-210D2, it also, in part 4 of that, it says that the plan shall include other information the Commission considers necessary to evaluate the plan. So I think that goes hand in hand. I would think that the staff would need to have all the necessary information so that they can give us the best, assessment of those plans.
Yeah, I think we'd be very happy to work with them on that.
Okay. Do you have any specific recommendation how that would? Should we just put it in the order, or do you feel? Again, maybe I read your testimony wrong. I just read it as just a rejection of the staff recommendation. That you need to give many more information, and that's that.
I would say I think we're very willing to share the information we have, and we already provide a whole lot of information as part of the standard reporting process that was put forward with the working group. Maybe a working group is a mechanism to revisit that and add more information, and we would certainly look to do that. But some of the specific data being requested, we don't track the data that way, so we just don't have it currently.
Okay. And then, if we were to go, the Commission were to go with their option, I guess 2, maybe continuing at the same rate. Would that foreclose the company maybe in the near future to again propose an amendment? Once the staff maybe has the necessary information that they deem important for a more accelerated process.
Yeah, my assumption is yes, but I'm not an expert in that area.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Commissioner John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Burton.
Good afternoon.
I have one line of question, but it's going to contain several questions, so I hope you'll bear with me. I noted on live rejoinder with Mr. Herson earlier this morning, you started alluding to reducing the normal capital replacement process from a 70-year period to a 30-year period under STRIDE. Is that generally correct?
Yeah, for the cast iron and, for the outmoded assets that we identified in STRIDE 1.
So what is the asset replacement anticipated for under STRIDE? Because I seem to recall when the legislature passed the bill finally in 2013, in its infinite wisdom, it anticipated going from about a 70-year normal replacement cycle to a 30-year replacement cycle. Is that true? Or are you saying it's only a certain class of components?
I don't think I've read the statute, I don't remember all the details. I don't think it put a specific number of years on there.
No, it did not, but I'm saying the discussions in the legislature, because I happened to be there, were that it was generally understood that we were going to go from about a 70-year. If we did nothing, it's going to take us 70 years to replace this infrastructure down to about 30 years. Do you understand it that way?
Yes, and I also don't think it identified specific assets.
It did not. It certainly did not. I'm just talking about generalities. Yes. So when you said to Mr. Herson that STRIDE allowed us, let me read it. I think STRIDE obviously is an asset replacement plan that we wouldn't have been able to replace the amount of assets that we have in the past 4, now going on 5 years. We wouldn't have been able to reduce the replacement of these assets from a 70-year plan to one that is now 30. Do you recall saying that?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. I appreciate that. So that anticipated that we would be in STRIDE cycles from 2013 to 2043, and your direct testimony alludes to that,
Yes.
correct? So the 30-year period was 2013 to 2043. Now, the period for those same assets is reducing to 2037, or a 24-year period. What accounts for that reduction in that from a 30-year period to a 24-year period?
I guess our Stride 2 plan looks to accelerate the cast iron because the performance has continued to increase over what it was when we initially put the plan forward. Similarly, we filed the amendment with respect to the 3/4-inch high-pressure steel services 2 years ago. And we've seen continued degradation of the performance there, so it's really working on that as well.
I appreciate that. So we've accelerated from a 7-year replacement cycle to a 30-year replacement cycle. Now we're going to a 24-year replacement cycle. Do you anticipate there will be additional reductions in that replacement cycle? Could we finish it all by 2032? What's your strategic thinking? How far can we accelerate this, and how do we do the balancing test that the chairman alluded to with regard to recovery, if you anticipate doing that going forward?
Yeah, we have no plans to do that. I do think as part of our integrity management plan, we would continue to monitor and measure, and we'd be looking at, hopefully, the leak rate stabilizing or coming down. That's done it with some of the other assets, but not with these two assets.
Yeah. Is there a trigger mechanism that says we need to accelerate, or can we afford to decelerate some of this replacement if things trigger the other way?
Yeah, I don't know whether there's a trigger mechanism. I don't know we've thought about that. I do think we've come forward now with what we see based on the best available information now for the next 5 years. But again, each year we do track the metrics and we look at the performance and we see where things are.
So we should anticipate that Stride will only be in effect for 24 years from 2013. Is that generally your understanding, even though it's not statutorily limited to that?
I think that's our current plan.
Okay. And when you say in your list of issues and major conclusions in your rebuttal testimony, the last bullet on page 2 of that list, that the proposed Stride 2 plan timeline of completing all targeted gas asset replacement work by 2037 is the appropriate timeline for BG&E's Stride program due to safety and reliability concerns. And here's the part I'm really going to ask you about. If the Commission wishes to limit BG&E's Stride 2 plan to the current pace, BG&E will reluctantly accept this decision, but feels compelled to work additional asset replacement projects outside of Stride to meet BG&E's proposed Stride 2 plan timeline, and will seek to recover non-Stride project costs through the future base rate cases. So are you saying in that statement that if we keep you on the same trajectory that you were on in Stride 1, the original 5-year tranche, that you're going to do that work anyway and we're still going to finish by 2037?
I think we're going to continue to monitor it, but over the next 5 years we want to set ourselves up so that we can continue to replace the assets and get these poor performing assets off the system.
So let me ask it this way. We have a plan that you've applied for in Stride 2. Mm-hmm. And you say if we keep you on the same pace and don't approve this plan as submitted, you're going to do the work anyway in that last bullet. I think that's what you're saying. And recover through the normal recovery mechanisms.
Yeah.
Base rate case.
I think over the next 5 years that would be the plan, but I also think that we're going to continue to monitor the performance of the assets and continue to look at that.
But assuming that all stays the same, we now have a 24-year cycle established from 2013 to 2037, and this plan takes that to 2037, and if we don't approve this plan and keep you on the same pace, you're going to do the work anyway, and you're going to still get done by 2037.
Yeah, we believe that's important.
So isn't it then true that staff's recommendation to keep you on the same trajectory is not going to be affected, not going to affect your general overall look by 2037 either way?
I guess from the execution of the work, yes. I think some of the rate-making impacts would be different.
And I also think we continue to look at it over the next, we would look at the continued performance over the next 5 years to see where we are.
Fair enough. So isn't it also then, if that's true, fair to assume that some of the projects in here don't need the acceleration because we'll arrive at the same end in 2037 anyway?
Some of the specific project list, yeah, I guess yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Commissioner Linton.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Mr. Burton.
Good afternoon.
My first question revolves around some of the testimony you've provided on page 40 of your rebuttal. Several other parties here, as well as my colleagues, have raised questions related to this before. I'm interested in your exhibit ACB 12, which lays out some of the overall structure for the Stride 2 revised proposal, which I guess would be what we consider to be the same timeline as the Stride 1 proposal. Has there been an effort to compare the benefits that would be different in a Stride 2 program versus a revised Stride 2 program?
Not that I'm not a specific cost-benefit analysis. Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, well, no, I don't mean a CBA. I'm referring to, in the statute, there's a requirement that the plan include a description of customer benefits
Oh, okay.
in the plan. So I'm trying to see if there's a difference for customer benefits between a revised Stride 2 plan versus the Stride 2 plan.
Yeah, I don't know that we've gone to a detailed analysis of what the difference in benefits would be. So the answer is no.
Okay. In your opinion, what would some of those differences be?
Well, I guess some of the benefits we've articulated, reduction of emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, so better environmental benefits, job creation, economic development, and public safety. So, to the extent that leaks are reduced quicker and assets are replaced faster, you'll see more of those benefits quicker.
So those would be benefits that would be attributable directly to Stride, but if the projects are still completed under your current pipeline replacement program, you would still need to have contractors and staff, just as an example,
Yes.
people to still come in and do some of that work.
Yeah, I guess just at that point, some of the benefits would, not all of those benefits would be due to Stride.
Right. Okay. All right. As part of some of our evening hearings in both, in Columbia and Towson, we did hear from some consumers that were concerned about the bill impact. The bill impact for these Stride costs. We've obviously had Stride now Stride 1 has been around for several years now. What has been the company's response to consumers that have raised concerns about the costs for Stride 1 and eventually costs for Stride 2?
We, first of all, with respect to the specific projects, we've done customer outreach associated with those and customer education. We've had some complaints associated with it, but not a large number. I believe in one of the data requests, I'm not familiar which one, we did answer that question with respect to the number of complaints. But we do answer all of those customer inquiries with respect to what that investment is going towards, and try to articulate the public safety benefit associated with the projects.
Okay, most of my other questions were already asked, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Herman.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Burton. I'm a little new to the Stride program, so you might have had to answer some of these questions the first time around, but I'm going to go ahead and ask them anyway
Okay.
for my education. the cast iron, I understand, is at least 50 years old and older. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
I believe all of our cast iron is greater than 50 years old, and some is over 100 years old.
Right. So why is it in just the last 5 years do we have an increase in leaks? I mean, wouldn't we have seen sort of an increase going like this instead of like that? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I don't know that we know exactly why that is. Some of the factors that we've seen, water intrusion, to the extent that there's water leaks and it disrupts the ground, you do get more movement, and that does cause, from a very cold weather and heaving. We tend to see, particularly with small diameter cast iron, because it's brittle, if you get a hard freeze, you end up with more leaks, more cracks associated with that. The cast iron was made in 10-foot segments or 10-foot pipes, and there's a joint every 10 feet, and that joint was actually filled with a compound. To the extent that leaks occur, many of the leaks are occurring at those joints. So it could just be the time frame associated with that.
Okay. And has there been any change in the way that you measure or when you're measuring these leaks since 2010 or since 2012? Is there any change in that?
No, I don't think there's any change in the way we actually track and measure them.
Okay. Do you believe that the increase in leaks is matching what's happening elsewhere in, say, Boston or, other urban areas where there might be a lot of old cast iron?
I've not seen a detailed analysis or benchmarking. I can say that when you look at our overall leak rate, we're the oldest gas utility, so we have the oldest assets, and you end up with one of the highest leak rates in terms of overall system performance. We have 12,000 miles of cast iron, so that is the when you look at the assets we're looking to replace, 70% of the leaks are from 20% of the assets, and that 20% really is represented by these outmoded assets like the cast iron.
Okay. So with respect to the pre-1970 steel services, your proposal under Stride 2 is to accelerate them from being completely replaced from 2024 to 2021. So it's a 3-year acceleration, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. The list of projects that you provided in your initial testimony, your direct testimony, which is ACB 3, and then comparing that to ACB 14. Those are the proposed Stride project list for 2019?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I was a little confused because while the little chart in purple at the bottom is different, all of the projects are listed, they're exactly the same. Or at least I believe they are.
They could be. I don't know that I'm fully familiar with all of the details of the chart.
Okay. It's in your testimony, though.
Yes.
Right. Okay. But, all right. So the other question I had on this chart is the reason for replacement, which is the last column. Again, every single one of these says that it's continuing work from 2018 as described in the 2018 project list, right? So if these are the 19 projects, how do we distinguish between what we did in 18 and what we did in 19?
So again, this is just when we put forward the preliminary list of projects, we continue to identify additional areas as we go, and we would do that as part of the normal planning process. That's what goes on during the year in preparation for the next year.
Right, but none of these appear to be new projects. Is that typical in Stride that we would, I mean, I understand that these projects can take more than a year and that, things might be moved over, but how do we account for that with respect to the surcharge if it was in 18 and it's continuing into 19? And maybe Mr. Frain's the right person for me to ask that question too.
Yeah, I guess the way I would characterize it is not all of these projects. Some of these are in the same area, but we would not have started them. So phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of a project. So, when we identify an area of a large concentration of cast iron main or bare steel, what we did before, we start to segment it into logical groupings from a regional perspective, and then we do a design process, and we try to stage them one after the other. But not everything is. None of these are what I'd say ready to go right now.
So when you say, for example, that Woodlawn Phase 3 is continuing work from 2018 as described in the 2018 project list, maybe the 2018 project list had Woodlawn Phase 2?
It may have, yeah.
Okay. Is there anybody else, is Mr. Case or Mr. Frain, that I can kind of clarify how this works?
Yeah, I think probably Mr. Case could answer some of those questions.
Okay. So looking down at the little purple box at the bottom of these, this is where it's different, where you said that if you compare, I'm looking at ACB 14, if you were to use the existing acceleration, cast iron would be 46.4 miles versus the 55 that Stride 2 proposed. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And a question I have about the dollars at the bottom of these purple charts. We go from 182 down to 137. Does that dollar amount include what you call in your testimony other costs? The category of other, we're replacing the cast iron, but then we find other issues to bring it up to current standards. Does that include the other?
I believe it does, and that's the way it's been done for Stride 1 as well.
You believe it does?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. And, when you're talking about the other category, hypothetically speaking, if something, you said to bring it up to current standards. So if something, say, is 5 years old, in the ground, but that current might be slightly different, but you wouldn't have normally replaced it, but to bring it all up to the most recent, you would, even if it were only 5 years old, would you replace it?
Yeah, I think, again, we would be looking at the current standards. So the large majority of those cases, that is still aged assets. It's just not 50-year-old assets.
Right.
In some of the cases, we're actually upgrading the system from a low-pressure system to a medium-pressure system. And as part of that, we need to replace the meters. We have to install regulators. So those would have to be replaced because we're upgrading from a low-pressure system to a medium-pressure system.
And that would, for excess flow valves, would they be included in that?
Excess flow valves, in the case of, if that was, current standards require excess flow valves or require other valves on the system. So all of that would be incorporated into this new upgraded system.
Okay, and that's included in the Stride cost as far as you know, but
Yes.
I can check with Mr. Frain.
Yes.
Okay. I noted in the testimony, and it may not have been in your testimony, that if we were to agree to the acceleration of Stride 2, that it would be an additional 400 new personnel would be required, that Stride 1 had resulted in about 600, and then that Stride 2 would be 1,000.
Yeah, I mean, again,
Contractors.
right, that's our estimate based on the amount of workload that would be incorporated.
Okay. Do you anticipate having any issues obtaining 400 more, given that, we hear sometimes that there are some issues with obtaining qualified people to work. Do you anticipate any issues with another 400?
Yeah, I think certainly when we look at our projects, that's going to be a challenge, but we've developed partnerships with suppliers, and several of them have done a very good job growing. We continue to work with those to have them continuing to organically grow. We also are working with additional supplier partners and bringing them onto the system and looking for them to grow.
Okay, so you feel confident that you could accomplish if the commission were to approve it, that you could accomplish that?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you very much, Mr. Burton.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Burton. We appreciate your testimony.
Thanks.
We are going to take our lunch break now. We'll be back at 1:50, and we'll bring up Mr. Frayne next. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We have an announcement to make. So the state has called a liberal leave for most counties, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, North and West for Maryland, and so we're going to need to adjourn for the day. We checked with the weather forecast. Things look really bad tomorrow, so what we're going to do is not meet tomorrow. We're going to come back Thursday morning at, we're going to have our administrative meeting, which was scheduled for tomorrow, but we'll be hearing that Thursday morning at 10. It shouldn't last long, so I think by 10:30 we'll be able to begin our proceedings. And then we'll get through as many witnesses on Thursday as we can. If we make good progress, we may even finish. Otherwise, we'll come back and finish up on Friday morning. Any housekeeping before we adjourn for the day? All right, hearing none, we will see everyone back at 10:30 Thursday morning.
I just want to let everybody also know what I'm going to do is we'll make a posting on our website. We'll change the hearing schedule and all that kind of stuff. It'll be in the alert section. So I would just appreciate if any of your contacts, if you want to, email to any of your folks, and just to make sure for anything with regards to the hearing or the administrative meeting, if you know anything, that would be helpful. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.